SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Hello and welcome to Indigenous Voices by iGaming Daily. I am Kelli Weaver, enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, Vice President of Relationships for North America at SBC, and your host today. I'd like to introduce my guest to Indigenous Voices, Chairman Jamie Hummingbird, enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation and Chairman of the National Tribal Gaming Commissioners and Regulators. Jamie also serves as the Seminole Nation Gaming Agency and Gun Lake Tribal Gaming Commission. Before we get started, I have a message from our sponsor. iGaming Daily is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalized player experiences with Optimove. And as another special offer, Optimove is offering new clients a free first month when they buy Optimove. For more information and claim the free month, go to optimove.com/SBC. So welcome to Indigenous Voices, Jamie.
Well, thanks, Kelli. Thanks for having me.
So I had Jacob Coyne on the last episode, and we did sort of an introduction to the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and the reason why tribal gaming is so important. So I wanted to follow up with you, Jamie, and introduce the regulatory side of gaming. And I feel like you have so much knowledge on everything regulatory. Can you tell me how you came into the tribal gaming industry?
Sure. I first started working for my tribe, the Cherokee Nation, back in 1992 and served in a number of capacities up until about the summer of 1998 when I became the Gaming Commission Administrator for the tribe. And it was about that same time that Class 2 electronic gaming was really coming into play in the industry. And the tribes here in Oklahoma really played a key role in the development of that aspect of our gaming industry. And Cherokee Nation was a big part of that. So I was able to come into the industry at a time when things were really starting to transform Indian gaming as we used to know it into the more modern version of Indian gaming as we know it today. And over the years, I've been able to serve in various capacities. I've served on 2 of the NIGC advisory committees, one to rewrite the minimum internal control standards, and the second to develop technical standards for Class 2 gaming machines. And I've been able to testify in front of Congress on 3 different occasions about the regulatory efforts that myself and my colleagues across the country do every day, and have served as the chairman of the National Tribal Gaming Commissioners and Regulators Association for the past 18 years. So it has been kind of a crazy ride, but it's been a good ride for the last 26 years that I've been involved in gaming regulation in Indian country.
Wow, thank you for that. So I think we first met around 2011. I was working for a background screening company at that time, and we were providing some of the background screenings for many of the gaming commissions across the nation. A few years into that role, I was able to launch a technology product on behalf of the company that would expedite the licensing process. And it was slow to gain momentum just due to, I think people were a bit afraid of technology at that time. We weren't as familiar with it. And so we didn't really get the critical mass that we had hoped for. But I think I kind of feel like it was a precursor to what was to come with ATS systems, applicant tracking systems, and ways to onboard employees and get people licensed, much quicker. I recall a conversation I had with a regulator, and I was telling him how, and something I'll ask you to speak a little bit more on, but the licensing process and what all is required in order to license someone, the information you must obtain. And I said, you have all this personal identifying information, And with this product, you could store it safely, and on our system, which was in a data center where, credit card payments are processed. And so it was highly secure. And I remember him looking at me. I was at a conference and he looked at me and said, Kelli, if I wanted to have a safer process, I would put a camera on my filing cabinet. I kind of chuckled at that. That was just the thought at the time. And that has only been, probably 10 years ago. And when I had that conversation, so I wish I could have predicted where the industry was going to go technology wise. And maybe we would have launched a little bit later than what we did. But I wanted to bring that up because two reasons here. One is, how has it been for the regulatory bodies to come into accepting or adapting or including into their processes technology? And the second part of that, I want to talk just a little bit about what the licensing process looks like for tribal gaming, because it's a bit different than for commercial gaming. So if we could just talk about how has it been adapting to new technology?
Well, actually, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, when I first came into the industry, the transition going from traditional paper bingo over into electronic bingo was just starting to happen. And there were very few tribes that were willing to take on this new type of development. And once the platforms, the games themselves proved to be not only economically viable, but also legally defensible through our various discussions and sometimes court cases involving some of these games. The use of technology is one thing that was incorporated into the terms of IGRA. The federal legislation did not put any limitations on the use of technology, provided it did not fully encapsulate the game into a more of a traditional slot machine type presence. But once we were able to demonstrate the safety and security of these machines and these electronic systems, you started seeing the spread of Class II electronic games across the U.S. And it's not just in that area that we were leaders or early adopters of technology. The ticket in, ticket out, or the ability to take a printed ticket from one machine to the next was really championed by tribal gaming, as well as taking the next step into digital surveillance. That was one thing that tribes were also early adopters of, that really kind of transformed the industry as itself. So looking at the types of technology advances out there, I would say that tribes have not necessarily been afraid of technology, but we have been cautious in our approach to make sure that we are putting forward something that is not only going to be able to meet the legal standards for use, but also makes economic sense for us so that we are making the best use of our tribe's assets. So the approach that we took is on the regulatory side, I would say, is probably a little bit more cautious than our commercial counterparts. They're a little bit more willing to take on risk than a regulator is. But I think that's the nature of a regulator. We have to be skeptical. We have to take a look at things and make sure that we've examined it so that we can attest to its viability and its compliance within our statutes. So it's been kind of a slow progress in the early years, but now with the rapid advances happening in technology, tribes are having to really get used to new things on a more frequent basis, and it's something that I think we have proven ourselves as being capable of responding to those types of changes.
So this will kind of move into the licensing process, but it's, as I mentioned earlier, it ties into the last episode that I had with Jacob Coyne. He's the executive advisor at San Manuel. But we talked about the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and also known as IGRA, as you mentioned, and briefly touched on NIGC, the National Indian Gaming Commission. And so I want to take a little deeper dive into that because, as I said, most of our audience may not be familiar with tribal gaming regulation and more familiar with commercial gaming. And so I would like to talk about NIGC, how it was formed because of the passage of IGRA, and what their role is in the regulatory environment of tribes. And so if you could touch on then how gaming commissions came to be created, that would be, I think, helpful for the audience.
Yeah, sure. In the pre-IGRA era, if you will, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not tribes had the ability to essentially govern themselves, to do things without any type of oversight. That was one of the main discussion points through IGRA's development and ultimate passage, is how are tribes going to regulate themselves, and what role does the state have and what role does the federal government have when it comes to tribal gaming. And in trying to solve that problem, the federal legislators came up with the class gaming division, if you will, by saying Class 2 games and Class 3 games, whereas Class 2 games, being things like bingo and pull tabs, were something that would be primarily regulated by the Indian tribes and with a small level of oversight by the federal government through this new agency called the National Indian Gaming Commission. Now, that was those two areas right there is where the National Indian Gaming Commission really has the bulk of its responsibility, because when it comes to Class 3 games, those are games that people are probably more familiar with, the traditional slot machines, the card and table games, and sports betting and things of that nature. Those types of games can only be done through a compact between the tribe and the state in which it resides. So the primary regulation for that is going to be determined by the terms of that tribal state compact, but predominantly it is the tribe that is responsible for oversight and regulation of games. So when the NIGC was formed through IGRA in 1988, they had a few years of processing to figure out exactly what their role is going to be. And early on, I think the agency was more inclined towards enforcement and being a little bit more active in its oversight of regulation. Over the years, and after maturing within the industry, the NIGC has now become more of an agency that is focused on training and technological assistance to tribes, or technical assistance, not necessarily technological, but that is a part of it. But they're more about getting tribes prepared and trained and capable of performing all of the various functions that we have to do. So the NIGC has gone from one that was a little bit more, again, more active in its role to one that is more empowering of tribes. So that's been a good transition for them over the years.
Yeah, I have noticed as well that they previously were more reactive to situations, and their presence has been more proactive in recent years, and it has been very well received by many of the tribes, very appreciated, because everybody wants a little guidance, and we want to be compliant because we want our facilities to operate and function the way that they're supposed to. It's our livelihood for our membership. And so I know that has been very much noticed in their interactions with the tribes. So you talked a little bit about the gaming licensing process. And I know that for tribes, and I mentioned this on the last episode, but when I was working in background screenings, the licensing process was a little bit more, how do I say it, relaxed, and and I don't want to say not as diligent, but for commercial gaming compared to tribal gaming. And I worked both with commercial and tribal, and the background screening packages I would see were completely different. And the part of the licensing process that NIGC requires looks at going back, 10 years and really, looking at criminal histories and residences where someone's lived and verifying all their past licenses that they've held. And I don't I guess if there's some advice for new companies that want to come into tribal gaming and work with them and be a vendor, can you just touch a little bit about what that looks like for them? Because I get that question quite a bit. People call me and say, "Hey, I'm licensed in Colorado. Can I work with this tribe in Oklahoma?"
Yes. That's one of the, I think, common misconceptions out there is if you get a gaming license in a jurisdiction within the U.S., that you can do business all over the country, and that's just really not the case. I was on a panel at SBC in Barcelona last year when I was able to address some of these questions, just like the one you just asked, and was able to give the audience this answer, and that is, just think of the United States not just as one country, but as 50 separate countries, because you have 50 states and each is a sovereign, each has its own rules and regulations. Similarly, tribes are just like states, and there are 550 tribes across the U.S., about 250 of which have gaming facilities in operation. So think of that as 250 separate states or separate countries, if you will. And each of us will have a different way of approaching licensing. And that is going to be largely dependent upon the terms of the tribal state compacts that I mentioned earlier, because those agreements are where it is outlined and agreed to by both the state and the tribe that tribes will license individuals in a certain way and they will license vendors in a certain way. And the information that we obtain from each of those applicants can differ even in the same state where there may be multiple tribes with a tribal state compact. There are certain elements of our applications that will differ from one jurisdiction to the next, but by and large, the main information will remain the same across the tribal jurisdictions. But it is going to be dependent upon what the states and the tribes agree to. So for a vendor that's interested in coming into Indian country, regardless of the state, I would highly suggest doing a little bit of research and looking at the compacts that are available. They're usually available on state websites and sometimes on tribal websites. Sometimes they're a part of state law like they are here in my home state of Oklahoma. That is something that is easily searchable, and you can find out generally what will be expected of you as a vendor, as a manufacturer, when it comes to getting a license from a tribe in that particular jurisdiction. So it's not something to necessarily be afraid of. It's nothing that I think any vendor who's ever received a gaming license has gone through before, but just kind of trying to know the subtle nuances by jurisdiction can largely be solved by doing just a little bit of online research.
Well, I think that's, such great advice. There's a lot of great technology out there, which takes me to my next point here. I joined SBC in 2022, in the spring of 2022, and we had our North America Summit that July, and that was the first one I'd ever been to. And I had done all the outreach and inviting people and bringing people to the event. But when I actually attended the event, aside from being on the virtual, I was a speaker for their virtual summit, I had never been in person. And so when I attended that in July of 2022, and you were there as well, I think that we were both made me unprepared for all the incredible technology that was available. You hear about it, tribes are operating. Some had passed sports betting at that time, and they were up and running. But I think when I got to the event itself, I learned that everything from sports betting, iGaming, social, fantasy, uh, um, you know, AI, KYC/Title 31, everything is pretty synonymous and uses a technology platform, and just how far advanced the industry was. And it was very refreshing to walk in and see that, because it wasn't something I had seen before at other conferences. And then as you mentioned, you went to Barcelona actually twice. I went the first year, and the same thing. It was you and B. Carson, the chairwoman for the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians Gaming Commission. We spoke on a panel there, but I just recall walking in and walking hall after hall after hall, and just seeing all technology. I just see it as a huge technology conference, and just quite amazing. I am excited this year. We're moving the SBC Summit over to Lisbon, and a much larger space, and I'm very excited to see what that brings. But can you tell me kind of what were your thoughts when you went to either the summit in North America or the one over in Barcelona? Did you have that same reaction?
I did. It was a very eye-opening experience for me. Just walking into the hall on the first day to check out what vendors were going to be there, I expected something of a smaller show. But when I got in there, I was surprised to see the large number of vendors and the diversity of vendors that were in attendance, because going through that hall, I got a good sense of what was going to be really coming down the pipe for Indian gaming when it comes to getting into iGaming, when it comes to getting into sports wagering, and all the different types of technology now that tribal gaming regulators are going to have to come to terms with, whether it be geofencing, whether it be responsible gaming, whether it be player protections, how the level of security, digital security is going to be required for us to get into these new ventures. And it was refreshing to see that there were a number of vendors out there that just kind of blew me away with what they had available to them. And to see not only those vendors, but probably twice that number of vendors at the SBC Summit over in Barcelona was a really interesting experience, to say the least. But it was one that I liked. I went back a couple of times. I'm going back again this year. And because the technology is always changing, we have to stay on top of it. So we have to make sure that we're getting into those places where the technology is being showcased by the vendors that are going to provide it. So, and as a regulator, it behooves us to really know a lot about all the different types of platforms that are out there, because we never know which one our operational counterparts are going to select and want to go with. So we have to be a little bit versed in each one of them. So it's very important for us as regulators to have that kind of exposure to those types of vendors.
I couldn't agree more. And I will go ahead. I think we're at the end of our time, but I just want to thank you, Chairman Hummingbird, and appreciate all that you're doing as far as leading in the regulatory space. And I look forward to seeing you at the summit.
Well, I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.